you, guys. Thank you. We're covering a lot of things today, and I just want to kind of set this stage because the topic is overwhelming as far as the detail and support. So what I'm going to do is put things in context. The focus, of course, is religion and the strong influence of it, let's put it this way, in our founding and, of course, throughout our nation's history. On the parallel with it is separation of church and state. And so we're going to see how the tension between those two issues throughout our history has occurred. And of course, we've learned to deal with it, right? Today we don't have any issues like that. Tension between those two things. Okay, so I'm going to give you a brief background as far as why we came over to the New World. I'm going to talk about the colonization and the effect that religion had, as well as insisting on separation of church and state. I'm going to talk about our Constitution and Bill of Rights, where that comes in and plays. I'm actually going to get into briefly the First Great Awakening, but I'm going to focus more on the Second Great Awakening. And then I'm going to get into the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which happened after the Civil War, and why that's important in regards to our Bill of Rights. And then I'm going to give some brief examples and issues of today. So you can see how overwhelming this is going to be. I'm going to field questions. I'm going to stop at certain points. So let's get started. All right, a lot of you probably already know this, but I have to put this in context. 1517, Protestant Reformation, we have Martin Luther nailing his protest on a cathedral, protesting the Roman Catholic Church, and what he said, of course, is it's corruption, not following the Bible, that the priests, the archbishops, the Pope, etc., are distorting the true meaning of Christianity. And as a result, you're going to have what is called, of course, the Protestant Reformation. It's going to spread through Western Europe like crazy. And there's going to be various groupings, if you will, followers of various leaders. And one of the most prominent one, as far as we're concerned, is John Calvin. John Calvin is going to take this Protestant Reformation and make it more radical in his views. I'm going to read just one little statement. If you're a Calvinist, you believe that there was an all-knowing God who preordained even your place in heaven or hell from the moment of conception. If you're a Calvinist, you believe at the moment of conception, the sperm and the egg getting together, you're predestined to go to heaven or hell. Good works cannot save you. And as a result, if you're a Calvinist, you're going to, of course, worry throughout your whole life whether you're going to heaven or hell. Those who believe in the Puritan belief, and of course this is where our founders come in, but also even Dutch Reformed Church and other churches. In the case of the Puritan Church, there was a belief that you have to go through a conversion. You will go through this emotional experience, this conversion, which will tell you that you are going to heaven, that you, in effect, are going to be one of the visible saints on earth. Now, once you go through this emotional conversion, you're expected, of course, to lead a godly life. And this became the center, obviously, of the Calvinist Puritans. Now, in 1534, King Henry VIII decided he wanted to break away from the church, Roman Catholic Church. Why? To get a divorce. The church wouldn't give it to him, so he took advantage of the fact of the Protestant Reformation, and he formed his own church, the Anglican Church, or the Church of England. It is during this time that you're going to have, obviously, conflicts among Henry VIII's children. and believe me guys, I am shortening this up, but eventually you're going to have Queen Elizabeth I on the throne, and she is going to put firmly in place the Anglican Church of England as the state-supported Church of England. And those that followed, you're going to obviously see persecution, discrimination against those, whether they be Roman Catholic or other dissenters. And among those dissenters are Puritans. The Puritans were members of the Anglican Church. They were part of the King's Church. But they were having a real problem with the way the king was handling it. They felt it was too Roman Catholic. They felt that only those who were visible saints who went through this conversion experience, who God ordained to be saved, should be attending the church. Now, if your king and your congregants, this group of Puritans, are saying, limit the membership of the church to only those visible saints, what probably will be your response? Anyone? You're king. You are head of the Church of England. Are you going to go along with limiting the membership of your church? No. Why not? Yeah, you want people to buy into this church. You want them, because you're head of the church, God put you there. Are you going to argue with the King of England if God put him as head of his church and as head of the government? The king maintains strong control in that regards. Okay, so what we have now is a group of Puritans who separate out, leave the Anglican Church. They're really causing problems, and at this point, they're going to go to Holland and live there for about 12 years, allowed to worship the way they want to, but they want to be Englishmen. Where can they be Englishmen? Well, they are now looking, obviously, at the New World, because at this point, Jamestown, our first colony, has been founded, and now they are going to ask the company that has the charter for Jamestown if they can go under their charter, and they say yes. So they leave, and this, of course, is going to be our pilgrims. These are the separatists, Puritan separatists. They are going to establish a holy commonwealth, a godly experiment where God on earth will dictate the laws, the rules, and of course, who interprets God's message? The church, and of course the leaders of the church. Yeah. So we have now the separatists and this holy experiment coming in to Plymouth. And the one I want to focus on is going to be the next colony, founded also in New England, and that is Massachusetts Bay. What I've done is first introduce this topic because it's really important that you understand where we're heading with this. Let's take the quote, and this is from a book, historian John Barry, Roger Williams and the Creation of the American Soul. And this is what he says: Winthrop would launch one tradition in American thought, a tradition of Christians inspiring the world. Their holy experiment, their holy commonwealth. Roger Williams, who we're going to be talking about in a minute, is going to contribute to a very different tradition, and that's one of individualism, law, rights, and freedoms. They both come at the same time. They both arrive 1630, Winthrop first. Roger Williams comes in a ship a little bit later in the same year. Both of them are seeing freedom in America as very different. For Governor Winthrop, he is establishing a holy commonwealth, God's holy commonwealth on earth. He is going to, and I want to read to this, there is no way, if you're establishing a holy commonwealth, even though he's coming here for religious freedom because he's been persecuted in England, there's no way he is going to allow religious freedom in his commonwealth. Why? Yeah. A commonwealth is a community, okay, following the rules of the community. His holy commonwealth is based on the Puritan faith that your liberties and freedoms are based solely on the church's dictates, if you will, okay? And it's theocentric. In other words, religion is very important in it. At the same time, they don't allow ministers or other religious leaders to actually run the government, but they cooperate, they listen to the ministers and so forth. And so everything was centered on this religious-based, holy God experiment kind of commonwealth. Let me give you a quote that I have a little bit later. First of all, here's Governor Winthrop, and he's, entering into Massachusetts Bay. And one of the famous quotes is "City upon a hill." But let me give you some other quotes so you may understand it better. This is coming from Winthrop. "The only right liberty was to do God's will as determined by the elected ministers and political leaders." Another quote, as he's arriving, "We have a covenant between the immigrants, those who are now obviously going to the New World, and God, and we need to obey holy ordinances. When God gives a special commission, he looks to have it strictly observed, for we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us." Anyone during the presidential debates and so forth, primarily in the primary, heard that statement that we are a city upon a hill? We're still using that language, and it's important to understand that. That is part of, this is our very beginning, okay? Liberty, he defined liberty, was to lead a godly life. It was the responsibility of government to see that a godly life was lived and to cheerfully submit to authority. Now, they had a direct democracy. The direct democracy, we have a representative democracy. We elect people who therefore then vote laws on our behalf. If we don't like the way they're doing it, we at the next election will vote them out. In a direct democracy, you will meet, like let's say this was a direct democracy. We're all part of this community. You come here, meet, and we directly vote. So they had, in the New England towns, which were small enough to do this, they had this direct democracy. Not only, and really important, not only with men, but only with Puritan white men, yes. Only with visible saints can vote on important matters. Only visible saints. Visible saints are members of the church. And only the male members of the church, yes, okay? So what you have is, actually there was more people voting than, let's say, back in England, but it was limited to the Puritans, visible saints. And if you didn't go along with the laws of the community, which of course are supposed to be from God, then you're not going to be allowed and you'll be punished. So let me give you an idea of the things. This is an example. Okay. Drunkards were admonished. First, they're, and we're talking about, obviously, if you're a drunkard, that's the role of government to tell you not to be a drunkard. If that fails, they wear the letter D for a long period. And if continued, they would be excommunicated. And what that means is that no one, not their wife, not their children, not anyone in the community can talk to them, even in the household. Okay? Now, there was public shunning, and yet if you rehabilitate, they would take away this excommunication, this shunning. If that didn't work, we've got whippings, mutilation, imprisonment, and then the final punishment would be banishment from the Commonwealth. Does anyone see an irony here? We come here seeking freedom of religion. What's the irony? Yeah, yeah. But do you understand why they were doing this? They knew that if they allowed dissent, and they clearly believed that this was a holy commonwealth, this is God's experiment, if you will, godly experiment, then what would happen if they allowed people who dissented? Well, if they allowed them to dissent, they could lose control of the community. Okay? Yes?
And the dissent that wasn't permitted, wasn't it that they were punished, and it was like, it was the entire family? Like if the wife was outspoken in public, and the church member saw it, that they punished the male, that they punished
Yes.
the husband, they didn't punish the family.
Yes, because women aren't capable of making their own decisions. So, you know, in fact, that's a good, there was laws at that time, which was really unusual, which was really strange. If I wanted to get rid of my husband and I really didn't like the neighbor lady, so I invite her over for tea, and I'm just giving an example here. I'd invite her over for tea, sit down, I'd take a gun or a knife or whatever and kill her. I wouldn't be arrested. My husband would be arrested. He is the responsible person. I'm just a woman. So there are advantages to this kind of, you know. Yeah, but in fact, you'll see that in later on when the women's movement got going and there was a convention at Seneca Falls where we announced we wanted to have the vote. That was one of the items that they put in there, that we can go, you know, with impunity, just do whatever we want. Okay, so now you have this holy commonwealth. Liberty is only God's will. Okay, a man comes along. Actually, he's a friend of Winthrop. He is a Puritan minister who is purer than anyone around. He is so pure, when they invite him to be head of the church in Boston and then Salem later on, he's invited. The church was not pure enough. We would probably call him today a fundamentalist, somebody very literal in his Bible, very pure guy. But when he comes, he's upset about two things. Number one is the way we treated the Native Americans, the way the Puritans just took their land without giving them any compensation. And he's going to befriend the Indians. In fact, he will write the very first translation of the Native American language in that region into a dictionary. And he befriends them. The second thing he's angry at is the fact that God did not intend anyone to have a holy commonwealth on earth. And his belief was that when the church gets involved in politics, it corrupts the church, because politics corrupts. Isn't that an outrageous thought? Politics corrupts. Okay, so at this point, he arrives, and I want to show you some of his quotes. Let's get some of his quotes. And keep in mind, he's a friend of Winthrop, and he is a very pure Puritan. The state had no authority to inject itself in any way into an individual's relationship with God. This is coming from a Puritan minister. William's request for a charter for Rhode Island, because when he flees, he is not legally fleeing in Rhode Island. He's going to have to flee Massachusetts Bay. And when he requests a charter for Rhode Island, he wants it to include liberty of conscience, liberty of thought in religion, and a government that had no role in regulation of religion. This is outrageous. At that time, there were no modern governments that had a separation between a church and the state. Okay? One of his very famous statements that comes from his a document he wrote called Blood Tenant of Persecution. Coercions in matters of faith leads to bloodshed, and forced conversion ends in hypocrisy. If you force me to convert because you're going to kill me if I don't convert, I think hypocrisy is going on. Okay? All people must be allowed, he calls it soul liberty. Even if they err, And he believed everyone else was wrong. The man thought Roman Catholics were wrong. He thought the Quakers were wrong. He thought everyone was wrong. He knew he had the way to God, but he did not believe it was his right or anyone's right to impose it on anyone. Only a free conscience has even the possibility of knowing the truth. It is the will and command of God that a permission of the most paganish, Jewish, or anti-Christian consciences be granted to all men in all nations. Do you realize how outrageous this was in 1630? And this is coming from a very religious, spiritual man. That doesn't seem to correlate. Why would he believe this if he's so religious? What's going on in his mind?
Because he's an idealist.
He's an idealist.
I mean, bottom line, he believes that people should believe for the right reasons or not at all.
Good point. And he believes in a freedom of conscience. And you know what? When he is going to be, I mean, here he's saying these things. He's saying more. He's going to be put before the fathers, the leaders, church leaders in Massachusetts Bay. Let me go back. And he is going to be put on trial. Do you realize what his statements do to their authority? You have a man going around saying these things. No, you don't have a holy commonwealth. God never intended anyone to have a holy commonwealth. That's ridiculous.
And he was so pure. He was such a pure pastor that he was seen as like the spokesperson for the church. So when you have the spokesperson of the church running around going, the church is wrong, then you have a big problem.
Really big problem. That's a really good point. If an atheist said this, okay, banish him, get him out of town. But you're having a man who is so respected, a leader of the church, and having obviously conflict with the church over the issue of government cannot tell you what to believe. Anyway, he's going to get word. He's found guilty. He's going to be banished. And he was ill, so they allowed him to stay home home and not move before the spring came. And it's during this time that the Indians, some friendly Indians that he's made good connections with, are going to sneak him out of Massachusetts Bay because he heard that their banishment was banishment to England. And he knew what that meant if he went back to England, as far as the king and the persecution going on at that time. So he ended up in a place that he will call Rhode Island. Providence is, of course, the name that he gives us, Providence, Rhode Island. And he is going to establish for the very first time a government with no tax-supported church. He is going to, in fact, allow Jews who were feeling really uncomfortable. They were in New York at the time. They had arrived there. They were they were being persecuted to some extent. And he is going to invite them to set up a synagogue, the very first synagogue in the New World, in the North American world, in Newport. He is going to invite the Quakers in. He is going to invite all of the people that he doesn't agree with. And he's going to allow them to have soul liberty, freedom of religion. It is going to be known. Rhode Island will be known as the sewer of society. It's going to be the place where all the riffraff go, all the people you really, don't want. Yeah.
Doesn't also the Bay, the first female, was it feminist or whatever? She's the
Anne Hutchinson. You're talking about Anne Hutchinson.
That God didn't speak through men, that God could also touch and speak through women, and then women could spread the word as well. And wasn't she sent to Rhode Island as well?
She ended up, though, in New York. She originally goes to Rhode Island, but she ends up in New York, and she ends up to be killed. And her philosophy, and this is the irony of it, and yes, Anne Hutchinson's philosophy, or not philosophy, she had a discussion. If you take predestination to its ultimate logical conclusion, God ordained you from the moment of your conception to go to heaven or hell, no matter how good you are in this life or how bad you are. If you take that to its ultimate destination, what she is going to argue is that why does anyone have to obey either God's laws or man's laws? You're going to go to heaven or hell no matter what. but this was more of a philosophical discussion. It's like you and I getting together with some of our friends and saying, okay, let's take this philosophy to its more extreme and let's talk about this. Yes, and she's put on trial. She was doing great until she said, they asked her where she got this information. And she said, God spoke to me. And that's your point. God does not speak to women. We know that. Okay? And so that immediately caused her to be banished. And that is, you know, that is another event on that one. So you need to understand, I know I'm spending a little more time on this and I'm going to have to move, but I need you to understand from the very get-go, we had two parallel beliefs in our nation's history. And when you hear some people, some of your friends, or you argue over we are a Christian nation, no, we are a nation that believes in, you know, recognition of individual liberties and freedoms and separating church and state kind of thing, you've got two streams that are going to be going through and impact us politically. And you're going to at times see this rise up, groups of people, and this comes back from way back there, 1630, okay? Now, we also had another colony that is going to not allow church support through taxes, and that's going to be Pennsylvania, and that is William Penn, and that's going to be a colony founded for Quakers. Quakers are a very humble religion. They certainly, they were in trouble in England too because they refused to pay taxes to the Anglican Church through the government. And they are going to set up, and William Penn is going to say, we're going to set up a holy experiment, but his holy experiment is allowing persons of all religious persuasions. Anyway, you know, by the pre-revolution, pre-American Revolution, we had two tax-supported churches in our nation. One primarily in the South, with some exception in parts of New York, and the other was the Congregational Church, which was the former Puritan Church. And that's primarily in the New England area, except Rhode Island, because Rhode Island doesn't allow a tax-supported church. And now at this point, we are going to have an event in the late 1600s, starting in Europe, actually mid to late 1600s, starting in Europe, and I think all of you know it as the Enlightenment. You're going to see philosophers. It's going to spread over here to those that are very well read and involved, but you're going to see philosophers rejecting the Calvinist view. And especially you have John Locke and others arguing that we should focus on scientific investigation. We are going to reject the argument that God had, and they're going to say, and I'll quote this, that a rejection of the Calvinist view arguing that God had not predetermined the content of the human mind, but furnished it with the capacity to acquire knowledge. They are going to argue God gave us a brain. He is not the puppet master manipulating the strings. And therefore, John Locke in his essay is going to go into this along with others. It's this Great Enlightenment period that is now going to trigger the First Great Awakening. It is apathy in the churches at that time. It is the questioning of God's role, if you will, and therefore you have a very revivalistic, emotional, people going to hear hellfire and brimstone kind of lectures and sermons, saying that if you don't go back to the church, you're going to burn in hell. It was trying to get the people back to the fold who had, of course, the fear, especially with the young people, especially with the students, that they are not listening to the word of the church, and they are now looking at the age of reason, science, and so forth. This is going to cause a division within the churches, and as a result, in fact, it's going to help create more diversity. And that was our Great Awakening. Generally, it was about 1720, 1730 period. You know that Revolutionary War kicks in after the 7 Years' War. England starts coming down on us, and obviously we lead to revolution. Okay? And I'm quickly going to have to, because my focus today obviously is on religion. When we established, our founding fathers established our second constitution. Our first was the Articles of Confederation, which created a very weak central government. When we established our constitution, they did put parts into this document. Many of our founding fathers were obviously not wanting a church-state connection. And so the first thing in our Constitution that deals with religion is Article 6, and it deals with running for office. There shall be senators, representatives, members of the state legislatures, all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution, but no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. So we put that right into that document. The part that you, I'm sure, have focused on is the Bill of Rights, and the First Amendment in particular. There is a copy of the General Bill of Rights, of the wording, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech and of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. This is our First Amendment, guys. This is probably one of the most important that you have to consider. When you're looking at religion, it's the first two clauses mentioned. You have the right, obviously, Congress cannot prohibit you from freely exercising your faith, your religion, nor can Congress establish let me read it, no law respecting an establishment of religion, not of a religion. If it was just of a religion, that means we can't have an Anglican church. It's of religion. So the Establishment Clause does not let us establish religion, and also you have the right to freely exercise your religion. It is not absolute. It is not absolute. The court, the Supreme Court in particular, is going to look at cases and interpret it. But generally when you're dealing with, and let's take the Establishment Clause, you have the issue of the government not getting involved in religion. Somebody give me some examples of government involved in religion.
Gay marriage.
Okay. You're talking about the Defense of Marriage Act? Is that what you're talking about? Okay. Good one, because I just heard that a court, I think it was a district court today, another one, said it was unconstitutional, the Defense of Marriage Act. Okay. Another example. Give me one that has been going on and we haven't argued. Yeah. If we, okay, show me, explain, it is involved. Tell me how.
Because some religions believe that it's ethical and some don't.
Okay, and there's where you have the problems, the definition. Somebody over here? Evolution versus the belief in the biblical interpretation of the Bible, saying how man was created. Yeah.
Taxation. Taxation of the churches.
The taxation of the church, which of course, yeah, good exemptions. That is legitimate. If you are a church, can somebody get that? If you are a church, and it doesn't have to be what your traditional churches, you will be tax exempt as long as you don't do things you shouldn't be doing. Yeah.
Taxation?
Which?
Taxation? Medical taxation?
Okay. Good job. We have a whole bunch of issues dealing with, and the government establishing religion. The government cannot establish religion yet. We do see it. The issue of under God and the pledge. Now, does anyone know when that actually was put in? Yeah, it was put in 1950s. Yeah, around that period. And that was because of the communist tension between communism and the Cold War. So you have that. You have the right to freely exercise your religion. And there is a multitude of examples of that, except when you try to argue that my religion believes in the use of drugs, officer, and I'm on my way to church, and that's why I'm stoned. No, don't even try it. Don't even try it. No, that's just not going to go. Obviously, there are some restrictions. And so we are seeing the courts continually, there was argue this. There's a recent, in fact, this morning's paper, I guess a very small school district in Texas is allowing their cheerleaders to carry banners and have symbols on their arms and whatever, biblical symbols. And so there's going to be another court case coming up. But this is a continual discussion, and we're going to see later on some more on that one. The word separation of church and state did not come within the Constitution document itself. It came from Thomas Jefferson, who actually was not involved in writing the Constitution. He was overseas representing us. And he was writing a letter to Connecticut Baptist ministers explaining the First Amendment. And he used the term a wall of separation between church and state. And his further quote is, "Religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship." And this is where we got the term separation of church and state. But when you look at non-establishment, clearly it reflects separation. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I was just wondering, I just saw a poster today about Muslim students coming together. How is that? I mean, this is a state-funded school. If you go to high schools, they don't allow different organizations of religions to come together on campus. So
Equal access is the key. We have laws that if you're, and again, you also have a difference. Public school is K-12, you have children, okay? They're going to handle things differently in a K-12 situation. But you also have the equal access issue. In other words, content cannot be restricted. If you allow any clubs, you have to allow all clubs as long as they're peaceful, okay? So when you're dealing, and actually the issue on free speech is not suppressing speech you don't like. Free speech is allowing it and then better argument. But yes, it's equal access clearly, that even in high school campuses, if you allow any non-academic or non-curricular club, you have to allow all clubs as long as they're peaceful.
Wouldn't you also have to think that, like high school, like college is more of an adult-oriented college, or like schooling. So when you're in high school, thinking about your religion and thinking about going to a religious group is not on your mind. Like it's not something that is like you do that with your parents. Your parents take you there. Like your parents keep you involved in your religious beliefs. And adding more to the already like chaotic high school would be is like seeing them putting in college is there's more room for freedom.
Well, sure, because you're adults, and and you also don't have the parent issue. There's a parent concern if, let's say, in a high school, the teacher gets up espousing certain religious views. But keep in mind that even in high school, you have the right, and there are religious clubs in high school, as long as it's not during curricular time. Okay? Education, the role of education, whether it be elementary school, middle school, at the appropriate age level, high school and of course college, is going to be to think, question, inquiry, make decisions on your own. You can't do that if you suppress opinions that are different, okay? And when so the discussion, this is what the role of education is, and this is, hopefully we're trying to do that. It is not memorizing facts and spewing it back. It's questioning, analyzing, and going, you know what, Professor, you know, I don't quite agree with you. Great, tell me why you don't agree with me, okay? And in the case of religion, the dialogue in a neutral setting, you know, is wonderful. It's wonderful to have that dialogue and on college campus or whatever. But again, it has to be one of respect, you know, and it has to be one of a give and take. You know, it's sort of like Roger Williams. Here is a man so religious, and yet he's willing to. He had an amazing debate going with the Quakers. It was letters and newspapers, and they really venomous sometimes, and yet he welcomed them. And so, you know, this is what it's all about. The Ninth Amendment, I plugged that one in because this is, somebody mentioned abortion and some other cases that have religious meanings, obviously. The Ninth Amendment in our Bill of Rights, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. And of course, just because we list all these rights in the Constitution, that doesn't mean those are the only ones you have. That's what it's saying there. And of course, basic human rights is the right to privacy. And this deals not only with the issue of religious views, but it deals with things like such as the government not getting into your private issues, okay? And that kind of thing. So we have this wonderful document, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. And by the way, the Bill of Rights was written only for the federal government. Our Constitution, with the attachment of the Bill of Rights, it says Congress shall not. States may, and states did have their own Bill of Rights, but they did not have to follow our Bill of Rights. That's going to come a little later, okay? So just hold that thought. Now, we had another issue going here. We had our great heroes, Thomas Paine, who said, what are you waiting for? Go have a revolution. We have Thomas Jefferson. We have Ben Franklin. All of these men of the Revolution were men of the Enlightenment. They were men who also tended to be deist. In other words, they believed in God, a higher power, whatever you want to call it. In fact, they may not have called it God, but they believed in a higher power. But they believed not in having an organized church. It came out of the whole revolutionary spirit of independence and questioning. So by the time you get to the end of the 1700s, you had Thomas Paine questioning in his Age of Reason and expressing the philosophy of deism, that churches were there to terrify mankind. He was very anti-organized church. And a lot of the college students and a lot of the young people were going along in that direction in the 1790s. You can imagine what the organized churches thought about this. They're freaking out. And so here we have another Second Great Awakening. And again, it was extremely emotional. It was lay ministers, many of them without any education, going out in the open fields, hundreds of people coming to listen to them. It cut across all religions, all states. It wasn't just in one area of the United States. It was our first really, significant mass movement, like the First Great Awakening, but it went further. Because what it did was, on the pulpit, not only was it saying, come back to the fold, but the way to come back to the fold, and here's where you see the shift, the way to come back to the fold is to go out and do good works, is to reform, is to change what we see that is wrong in society. So out of the Second Great Awakening, what you have now are the movements that we're going, the reform movements, the movements on temperance, banning alcohol, the movement against slavery is going to come during this period of time. The movement questioning, you had mental institutions known as insane asylums were now being looked at, that maybe these people are not evil, whatever, that they need medical care. You had women told within their churches, it's okay. You don't have to stay in the home as long as you're doing good works because you are the moral backbone of society. So now what you had are the churches allowing women to go out and make changes. And as the women went out to do this, they realized nobody was listening to them. Why? Because they were, well, that's a good reason, because they were women. And therefore, because they were women, they did not have what? Yeah. Politicians do not listen to people who do not or cannot vote, okay? And so therefore, and you could see this in, if your percentage of grouping is very low in voting, they're not going to listen to you. And in the case of women, they were not allowed to vote. Well, how could we vote? God doesn't speak to us, and we can't make up our own mind. We're going to, obviously, how can we vote? Anyway, and this is when the suffrage movement started coming. And by the time you get to the 1848, when they had the convention, you had movement where we need the vote so that we can make these morally good, decisions. We can help persuade the politicians and so forth. So you have this. You also have coming out of this new religions, which means that with these new religions, you become more diverse. Therefore, how can you have tax-supported churches? So by the time you get to the 1830s and 40s, states on their own had dropped tax-supported churches. Many before that, okay? This is the time that we have the creation of the Mormon Church. This is the time that we have the creation of a split within the churches. It is trying to, you've got two parallel ways of thinking. You've got the science, the deism, the intellect, the freedom, the independence, and then you also have the matter of faith. And they're running parallel, and at times they're going to come in conflict. Okay? I told you, the Bill of Rights did not apply to the state governments. Well, after the Civil War, we passed amendments to try to give protections to the newly freed slaves. We know the 13th Amendment, of course, banned slavery. The 14th Amendment is going to try to protect them so their citizenship rights will not be taken away once the South is in the Union, back in the Union. We were fearful that the South would take away their liberties and rights. So the intent of the 14th Amendment was for the newly freed slaves. It is going to be probably one of our most important amendments to our Constitution. What it's going to do over the course of decades and decades is that the courts are going to take this and start pulling in our Bill of Rights protections under the 14th Amendment to the states. In other words, states, you can't deny freedom of speech. States, you can't deny all the search and seizure. You have to have the Fourth Amendment protection. Okay, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So, definition of citizenship, right here. By the way, Hawaii is a state in the Union, guys. And even if it wasn't, his mom was American. End of story. Okay. No state, is that a bias? All right. Let it go. Okay. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. You can't make any law state which abridge your privileges and immunities. Okay? Southern states, beware, you can't do it. Of course, they didn't do it, right? They didn't have segregation, did they? Yeah. So what is this? Right away, what am I telling you? We put something on a document. It happens, right? It's immediately enforced. It's white and black. You're not going to see any violation of it, right? No. Good ultimate goals to have, how we enforce it, and we're still struggling at times with it. Okay. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Got to have habeas corpus, you got to be charged with a crime, you got to have a trial by jury, a speedy trial, all of those things, okay? Nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So if you're African American, you cannot be told you cannot go to this school, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. Well, of course they denied it. The 14th Amendment was in place, and in a very short period of time, you did have Jim Crow and segregation in the South. It is though the 14th Amendment that 100 years later is going to say no more segregation. So it's really important in understanding this. And what happens, all of this language here is going to say, okay, First Amendment, that deals with equal protection, that deals with due process as far as, speech, whatever. They're going to look, and privileges and immunities, they're going to look at this 14th Amendment and say, states, you can't deny those guarantees that were given in our Bill of Rights, most of them. And religion, of course, freedom of religion and non-establishment. And most of the non-establishment, or most of the cases dealing with the Establishment Clause, is the states. It's the state schools. We have a state school system. It's not the federal government system, it's a state school system. Therefore, when you say you can't establish religion or deny free exercise, you're dealing with a lot of state issues. This is going to pull that to all of the states. And that's where you have zillions of cases, okay? Most of them were in play, or it happened around the 1960s when the court started hearing 14th Amendment issues dealing with religion. They're going to, by 1971, they're going to establish a test in regards to what a government could do as far as religion. It has been, the current court is kind of looking at it and dealing with it a little differently. So we can't say for sure if it's going to stand or if they're going to change it. It's the Lemon test. Any federal law, and obviously any state law, and any local law, and that includes, again, school districts, any law, any action, government action, must have a secular or non-religious purpose when they did that law. The principal or primary effect must neither advance religion nor inhibit religion. It has to be religion neutral as far as its impact on religion, okay? And the third part of the Lemon test is that it must not foster an excessive government entanglement. For instance, if we give money to parochial schools to buy textbooks, they may consider that excessive government entanglement because they're going to have to check out each and every textbook to see if there's anything religious about it that's biased favoring their particular religion. Okay? So the cases you've seen dealing with taking the 14th Amendment and applying that First Amendment dealing with religion, a lot of those cases deal with children, minors. You can't have religious symbols in public schools. You can't have it in private schools. Private schools can have, obviously, whatever they want. Public schools, which is taxpayer state schools, you can't have religious symbols. You can't have a prayer in the beginning of the classroom. You can't have a prayer out on the football field if it's over the public loudspeaker. You can have it in the locker room if the guys are doing it on their own and not coach-led. Do you understand how much gray areas there are? Each case is going to be looked on, like these young cheerleaders who are carrying signs. I don't know if it'll get to the Supreme Court or not. It may just, I have no idea where it's going to go. But the point is that we're talking about K-12 public schools, children, and the courts are going to be very, very limited in allowing religious issues. When you're dealing with evolution, we have cases on that. Took them a long time to finally support only teaching evolution in the science classrooms. You cannot teach creationism or any in the science classes. You can in a religious studies class. You're looking at government land. And basically, if it's a specific religious symbol up there, they're going to say if it's on government land, federal government, State government, city, whatever they're going to say, it comes down. Now, here's where you get to the gray areas. Sometimes they say, well, if you mix it up a bit, we'll allow it to stay. So you've got a menorah and a Christmas tree and a something else, you know. The courts have been struggling with this, you know, especially as we become more and more diverse. The cross on Mount Soledad has been told it has to come down for 20, 30 years.
Forever.
And they've tried to manipulate it by just selling the land right around the cross to a private organization. The court has not accepted that. So right now I think it's in discussion to try to work out some sort of a solution. There's loads of different cases, and as our nation has become more and more diverse, the religious issue has become more of a concern. Okay? Let me stop here for a second because I want to take another case. Any question on any of this that I've just gone through? Yes?
Where do you feel the line is crossed from religion to, like, or religious to secular in regards to taxation? Like, what I mean is, when does a religious institution forego their, like, exemptions
There is,
by participating in the secular matters?
yeah. They can take positions, and they do. And I have here, this is this is a joint statement of current law done by, it's across the board. It's Wake Forest, and they took what are the laws, current laws, not the laws that they necessarily like, but what are the current laws. And basically, you get the tax exemption, you can't sponsor a candidate, okay? You can't back a specific candidate. You can certainly back issues. Again, a lot of gray areas on that one, okay? And it's a matter of people obviously bringing it up as a violation too. We know that there probably are violations out there. Can they form, and we know that there's, for instance, organizations formed that represent the view of, let's say, Christian churches, as an example, and they can do that, but again, they have to be really careful in moving away from the issues to a specific candidate.
So just candidacy, like, I mean,
Yeah,
in general, that may, like,
yeah.
like your individual rights, fair game.
Yeah, I mean, what they could do is they could educate you where the candidates stand on the issues, and that's usually a way of doing it. This candidate and this candidate, this is where they stand on the issues, this is where they stand on the issues, and of course, this is where we stand on the issues.
So what I'm wondering is, how is it that the exemption in itself, how is that not respecting an establishment? 'Cause
That is a very good question.
Every tax that each and every one of us pays helps you build those buildings, helps you get these
Yes.
kids to their school, helps
Correct.
you pay for the gas for their vehicles.
Because they're not paying their taxes.
Yeah, how is it that they're not paying for that, but all of us are?
That's a very good point.
Isn't that because it's a nonprofit institution that works to help the community? So it's not seen for a religious idea, it's seen for...
Well, it is seen for religious ideas, but it is a nonprofit, is what it'll fall under the nonprofit. But it will be seen as a church. That church will be defined as a church. And again, it doesn't have to be the traditional churches. It could be everything from, you know, a small group of people, as long as it shows that they meet regularly and that kind of stuff. That's a really good point. And people are going to stand in different, we know that. And if I took a vote in this room where you stand on issues, you're going to have people who obviously favor more of the supporting of religion and seeing, you know, one of the things, and that you bring up, there's very often a conflict between the free exercise and the non-establishment clause, and that's where you could head with this. My right to freely exercise my religion is to establish, let's say, a church. Now, your argument, of course, is that the government, by exempting the church from paying property taxes and all other kind of taxes that are exempted, is a violation of the Establishment Clause. But then they could argue, I want to freely express my religion, and this is because we're nonprofit, this is the only way we could do it. I, as a teacher, could, argue for a particular faith, but what I'm doing is my free exercise. But I am working for the state of California. This is a community college, state of California. Therefore, I am representing the establishment of, if I say my religion is the only way to go, then obviously I'm causing conflict with the Establishment Clause because this is a state university, college. Okay, so you've got that. Those two sometimes conflict. The cheerleaders out there are arguing our rights for free expression of religion by carrying these banners and biblical quotes and whatever. But they represent the school district as cheerleaders. Once they put on their cheerleading outfit and they're standing in front of a crowd on high school campus, they are considered, by using the microphone and by being part of that school experience, they're considered representing that particular school, not their own individual free expression. And this is what we have to deal with all the time in that conflict. And yes, you're right. That's a really valid point. And some people would definitely argue that way. And then others, of course, would say, no, churches need the support, therefore let's not tax them. Really good point, though. Yes?
So it's one thing for a church to take a stand on an issue, but isn't it unconstitutional for them to actually fund a campaign against an issue, like both the Catholic and the Mormon church did against Prop 8? They put millions of dollars into that. That's unconstitutional.
And you know what? I'd have to look at some of that. I would argue that it probably is, yet. Because again, it's not a candidate perhaps, the way they did it. I'd have to know how they got the books going the way they did, how they funneled the money. Obviously, they've been able to, so I'm not, we'd have to look at each individual case. I would argue that, but again, the church has a right to represent its point of view in a political arena too.
That was also a state matter in California, yet Utah, through being like the,
You
head of
can
the
cross
Mormon
state
church,
lines.
actually gave funds
Yes,
through the
Yes.
California chapters
Yes.
to fund this.
yes, yes.
So,
It's a national church. It's an international church.
yeah.
Yeah.
How is that legal even?
Protestant churches do it, Catholic churches do it on their issue of abortion, for instance. And the issue that I'm going to show you, let's take that one and look at that one, because this really contraception. And I was, yeah.
Wouldn't that go against the separation of church and state? Because what the church does with its money is its own business.
Mhm.
If the government's like, no, you can't vote for that just because you can't use your money for that because it's a state matter and you can't have anything to do with the government. Like all of that wouldn't it reflect on the separation of
Well, it would
church and state?
reflect on their right to freely
The
express.
government would have to be stepping in and being like, that's unconstitutional, we say so. And then
Yeah.
wouldn't they argue that's where that would,
That and also
religion is
free
separated,
speech.
is
Yeah.
whether it's an international religion or not, it's
Mhm.
separated
Mhm.
from the state. So the government can't do anything and tell them how they can use their money.
Again, you have restrictions, though.
I was just going to say, it really hinges on if they have tax exempt status.
Yeah.
So that's what it hinges on. Of course, anybody any group can put money into anything, especially with Citizens United. It's pretty much unlimited.
Yes.
However, what it hinges on is that they have tax exempt status, and by taking that tax exempt status, they agree to certain things. And one of those things is not to put money into campaigns. That's the
And that it clearly is, but can they funnel in? And again, Citizens United really opened the door to a lot of issues. But there are organizations, like Fall's organization, several others that are formed as a separate entity that is carrying on for the cause of particular churches. And so you have that issue. But you bring up a really good point. And again, you have to take each issue, the gray areas, how they do it. There are laws there. Can they get around some of the laws? You know, that's going to be a key. This is a great example, though, to talk about the actual government intrusion on laws. I want to read to you this background of this man because it's fascinating. This goes back to the mid-1800s, and this primarily is the Roman Catholic Church, and that we're looking at, although some Protestant churches. Okay, Anthony Comstock. In 1873, he became secretary and special agent for the Society for the Suppression of Vice. That was the name of the society, as well as being appointed as an inspector for the U.S. Post Office. So I'm an inspector of vice organization, and I'm post office, okay? It is in this year, through his lobbying efforts and those of the Catholic Church, that Congress passed the Comstock Law, which in reality was used effectively to target birth control information and devices, information on sexuality and sexually transmitted diseases, obviously related to vice, right? Guys, laugh. Thank you. The title was Vice. You know, you can go, okay, control pornography through the mails. I can go with that. Okay, but what this law is being used for is contraceptive devices, information, how you get sexually transmitted disease that you obviously don't want. Okay, now, state laws came supporting this, obviously. This is a federal law, and then you have Comstock state laws. And this was a congressional mandate that, you know, states have to follow. Federal laws, as you know, are above state laws. They are supreme over your state laws. Well, a woman by the name of Margaret Sanger, I think some of you may have heard of her. She's really a leader in the contraception movement. Anyway, she took this to a trial in 1938, and it did resolve the federal ban. They said, unconstitutional, you can't do it, okay? So the federal law was out. Unfortunately, it did not ban the state laws. States were allowed to continue the Comstock restrictions. It will not be until 1965, okay, that you're going to have a case, Griswold versus Connecticut. Connecticut, the state of Connecticut, had an anti-birth control law. And the law is going to be challenged, okay? It was implemented during this 1800 period, the late 1800s, and this is what the law said. Any person who uses any drug, medicinal article, or instrument for the purpose of preventing conception shall be fined not less than $50 or imprisoned not less than 60 days, nor more than 1 year, or be both fined and imprisoned. And then another section said that any person who assists, abets, counsels, causes, hires, or commands another to commit any offense may be prosecuted and punished as if he were the principal offender. In other words, the doctors. If a married couple came to them, they said, I've got 7 kids, I want to stop having kids, the doctor would be then put in prison, fined, whatever, for giving advice on contraception. The justice in 1965 case, Griswold case, Justice Douglas, speaking for the court, said, would we allow the police to search the sacred precincts of marital bedrooms for telltale signs of the use of contraceptives? The very idea is repulsive to the notions of privacy surrounding the marriage relationship. And so in 1965, married couples can use contraceptives in Connecticut. Okay, and other states that were still enforcing this. But notice I said you had to be married. It's not going to be until Eisenstadt, which comes later, that this will extend to the right to privacy for unmarried people. And then because of Griswold, that's when it extended on abortion, the same issue, the right to privacy for the woman, make decisions with herself and the doctor and so forth. And that's when you had Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade was based on, first you had that contraception issue, and then you had, of course, the abortion issue and the right to privacy. It was and here's where you get that matter of conscience. This is a little bit harder to pin down perhaps than, let's say, a cross on a piece of land, or a symbol of another faith, or any of that. This is more of a matter of conscience. And that is where Roger Williams was focusing also, the freedom of conscience. And obviously, this is still, we're still dealing with this. In fact, I do have a solution for contraception. I think it could work. You don't get it? I think it's the same thing as putting one of the politicians said, one of the methods to use or something. Putting your knees closed or something similar to that, yeah.
Hey, want brisket?
Yeah, right. Put a tree down. Okay, you'll find a way around it. Okay. Let's take. I hope this went through real fast, and I was trying to give you an overview, but I was trying to focus on the idea, and I hope you got that. You have two very strong views, and it seems to pop up every now and then. Where you have people who are very strong on their faith, wanting obviously to bring their values to fore, and then of course you have people on the other side saying separation of church and state. And this is part of our history. This election is nothing new with it. Even in the 1990s, it was still very strong too. In fact, it was extremely strong in the 1990s. But this is, part of our history. And some of you may fall on one side or the other more. You have to, acknowledge that, though. That is part of the American psyche, if you will, if we have a psyche. Our cultural and our conflict. And very often there is that conflict. Is there any question? Yes?
What about like a structured world religion class in public school? Do you think that would help shed light on any of the gray areas?
Yeah, well, it certainly is. If you had, guys, 1 second.
Yeah, just stay put.
Yeah, I know you're hungry for lunch and all that. In 5 minutes. If you had, obviously, understanding the commonality of all religions is really a key too. We have a lot more in common than we have in differences, okay? And that certainly the values of brotherhood and love and all of that come across through our major religions, definitely. Done on a very neutral plane, like you said. Strictly informative. With analyzing what their values are, comparing it and having discussions, I think is wonderful. Again, keeping information away from people does not help.
Yeah, no, like where it said it's like public schools and protecting the children, but it's not really protecting them, is it? It's just
No, and you should have courses at all levels that at their age appropriate that talk about, that people believe in different things and it's fine, and, we all have so much more in common that we should focus on, that our values. Yeah.
Well, I think like the birth control, like I think how it's being added into the new health plan, and how the new forced health plan that the people are gonna have to get. I just think it's probably because of just I know me personally going to my school, I know there was like a group of freshman girls who were already pregnant. Like 14-year-old girls that were pregnant by seniors in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I first started school in elementary school and then through middle school, that wasn't even like a really big problem. Like you had like a select, maybe 1 or 2. But by the time like I was graduating, I was having like a group of like 10 plus girls that are freshmen in the freshman class that are pregnant by seniors. So I just think it's a big problem. Like birth, like underage conception is just such a big problem.
Yeah, and a lot of that is discussion in class, and obviously groups that say we only talk about abstinence and we don't talk about any other option You know, it has to be laid out there. On the school board in San Marcos, which is where I was on the school board, we had this big crisis where some counselor, this goes way back, put papers in as girls were coming in saying they were pregnant. This was middle school. And what she did, I think, was duplicate the same girl over and over or something like that. Anyway, it got in the newspaper. It blew up. It just totally blew up. San Marcos, you know, all these girls getting pregnant. And of course, that was when the parents came to the board and said, we don't want to have sex education class. We want abstinence only, and we're not going to allow you to talk about sex. And I'm going, hello? Maybe we should talk about it. But anyway, yeah, that's it, and it's a tough call. And when the schools take on the role as parents, that's another tough call, and that's a whole other issue that one has to deal with. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.